the almost 11 months since the release of Dishonored 2, a game I've previously stated was my runner-up for the Game of the Year 2016, I've had plenty of time to ponder the ups and downs of Arcane's seminal Stealth 'em Up series, amongst other things. I've spoken before about how much I enjoy the series despite their flaws, and how although Arcane has a habit of making interesting worlds and failing to use them to their full potential, the gameplay and challenge of a no-kills, no-powers ghost run of the games is enjoyable enough to forgive a lot of its problems. Dishonored was a game that came out amidst a flood of shooters, open-world adventures and sci-fi epics. Spec Ops, Far Cry 3, Mass Effect 3. Of them all, Dishonored was different enough to stand out. Not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, just different. With Death of the Outsider, the flaws that have always niggled away at the back of my mind about this series are by now utterly glaring. Don't get me wrong, Arcane's latest series expansion is not a bad game, not by a long shot. Technically, it stands head and shoulders above its predecessor in terms of its PC performance, although I couldn't raise my anti-aliasing any higher without tanking the frame rate, so if everything looks a little sketchy, then I apologise in advance. It's a gorgeous game otherwise, making great use of the series' staple painting style, although at this point I would have been surprised if Arcane had managed to make a blunder of a stylistic aesthetic that it pretty much patented by this point. But for all its enjoyable visuals and same slick, polished gameplay, there's something that feels very empty about Death of the Outsider, something very hollow. In preparation for writing this review, I replayed the first game, blasted through the expansion twice, and played both the Knife of Dunwall and Brigmore Witches expansions again. I wanted to test something, to see if replaying the games in the wake of the middle-of-the-road experience of this new expansion has made the flaws any more obvious. And it did, though only somewhat. Death of the Outsider made me realise that some of the issues with one of my favourite game series have always been there. However, what the previous games did was successfully mask those problems with interesting missions, level design, and being fresh and new in a year stagnated by the same games over and over. Death of the Outsider, more than anything else, feels like a retread, and an empty one at that. It's impossible to explain why this game was so disappointing to me without spoiling the whole thing, so let me say this now. If you want more of the same, then you'll more than likely enjoy this game. If you want a story that does the Outsider, one of the most interesting and compelling characters in recent gaming history, some modicum of justice, you will not enjoy this expansion. If I had to assign a numerical value to the expansion, I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10. With that out of the way, be warned that from now on this video will contain heavy spoilers for the entire DLC, as well as potentially previous games. Death of the Outsider is a stealth or slash 'em up depending on your preference, in the exact same vein as the first two games and the Dowd DLCs. You take on the role of Billy Lurk, the assassin who betrayed Dowd in the Knife of Dunwall DLC, thinking him old and soft, which in this game he most definitely is. In a series of 5 reasonably lengthy missions, you seek out the blade that created the Outsider in the hope that it will also destroy him, and enter the void with that intention. As with previous games, you have a variety of tools at your disposal and several means of gaining entry to the buildings that hold the secrets you need to bring down a god. Level design is still the game's strongest point, although I found each area far less engrossing than previous entries. The game features a bank heist mission that is by far the standout map of the game, rivaling the Clockwork Mansion from Dishonored 2 for its impeccable layout and means of proceeding. It's a shame really, as it's the only level that feels fresh and new in the grander game. Everything else feels like a retread with the same Sir Conan streets, even the Royal Conservatory making yet another appearance after being absent for just 11 months, and the same enemies all over again. The problems that plagued Dishonored 2's levels, which felt fragmented and held together by only a threadbare plot, are largely absent. In their place are some brand new issues that are almost entirely in relation to the overarching story. In terms of gameplay, Death of the Outsider is a strong player. It features a familiar cast of the tools of the assassin's trade and 3 brand new abilities that, whilst you may find one vastly more interesting than either of the other two, are new enough so as not to be repetitive, but at the same time, the second most interesting ability, called Semblance, which allows you to wear the face of an unconscious person for a period of time, never really feels like it reaches its full potential. There are a handful of places it can be used, but they feel trophy, as if they were added in just for a gimmicky achievement grab. For example, there's a level in which you can wear the face of a High Overseer of the Abbey to attend a meeting of Oracular Sisters, their female equivalent, though I elected not to do this, as sneaking around with my wits and cunning is my preferred method of ingress in hostile territory. Semblance, a little like the domino power from Dishonored 2, is one of those powers you forget you have until the game passive-aggressively reminds you of it, and instances where I thought I might be able to make clever use of it wound up wasting my time. With regards to the protagonist, Billy Billy is a semi-interesting character. The biggest problem is that her story is explored in optional DLCs, an issue that persisted in Dishonored 2, and if you've not played the DLC, then the chances are that you won't find Billy to be a particularly interesting or sympathetic character. The game tries to explain her backstory and what's led her to seek out Dowd, her former Master Assassin companion, but it does so very quickly, with no time to develop their relationship because it's already happened in another expansion. Still, Billy's character is likeable enough, enjoyable to play as, although she functionally isn't all that different to Emily Coleman. She's swift, snappy and witty when she fancies. Her dialogue draws an enjoyable line between snarky and grim, and though she suffers for her lack of embellishment, she's still interesting enough to carry a game thanks in large part to her splendid voice actress Rosario Dawson. So in terms of gameplay and level design, the game is by and large exactly what you'd expect, a miniaturised version of the previous main entry, as slick and fast with a little of Billy's edge to make it just different enough to matter. But still, not enough has changed to make it feel like a fresh experience. The tools are a combination of Dishonored 2 and the Knife of Dunwall, and whilst 2 of the 3 powers are new enough, you can't upgrade them or unlock other abilities. On the one hand, this is understandable. Billy is not technically marked by the outsider, although he does fashion her a very odd-looking crooked arm and eye. On the other, it's frustrating because the only way to improve the powers is to find relevant bone charms, which can be a massive pain if the bone charm nuance is corrupted, meaning it has a positive and negative attribute. It's about making sacrifices, you could say. Or it's lazy game design. I'll give the developers the benefit of the doubt. But the game's biggest flaw is the horrendous way it deals with the outsider. An initially compelling and profoundly proud, twisted character whose motives are and have always been unscrupulous. This expansion reduces him to a virtual quivering wreck. Dowd wants Billy to kill the outsider for turning them into monsters. The outsider wants Billy not to kill him for only giving them his gifts, not dictating how they use it. In the end, you have a choice: to kill the outsider, or learn his name and set him free with it. This non-lethal approach comes out of nowhere. Why must I free the outsider one way or another? Why can't I adhere to his wishes and leave him alone? This was the choice I wanted, but as I sat back and watched yet another awkward, abrupt and deeply unsatisfying ending play out before me, I had to wonder, who wrote this? Who gave the outsider the most hollow ending imaginable? The choice you're given at the end stinks of wanting to remove the outsider from the equation by any means possible, but I cannot fathom why. The outsider is the thread hanging in the balance of these games, a neutral being who relishes watching interesting characters make unorthodox choices. We're not meant to understand his motives, and I've never wanted to know them. The attempt to build a backstory in Dishonored 2 is intriguing, but it wasn't needed. I didn't want to know how the outsider was made, and I certainly didn't want to unmake him. But if I were forced to make this choice, I wanted more than what I got for my trouble. Early on in the final level, there are indications that the outsider was fashioned in the wake of an older god, and that the god who came before him was destroyed so that the outsider could be born. What I wanted after learning this was to be given the decision to choose who the new outsider or new god would be. And as I made my way through to the heart of the void, in an impressive and enthralling final vista that was breathtaking in its simplicity, I found to my dismay that this was not what the game had in mind. It just wanted rid of the outsider. And for the life of me, I can't understand why. I can only imagine that this is leading to something more interesting and more complicated in the by now inevitable Dishonored 3, but the egregious manner with which the game deals with its conclusion is deeply unsatisfying. I wanted to be able to see the ramifications of my choice, not be greeted with 2 endings that were virtually identical but for the first 20 seconds. I wanted to assassinate the outsider and see Billy dragged into the void to take his place, or free the outsider and make the decision to immortalise Dowd. Anything but the choice I was given. All in all, I'm disappointed. Death of the Outsider is a fun game to play, but the experience left a bitter taste in my mouth. I certainly enjoyed my time with it, but whilst the credits rolled and I sat back desperately hoping that there would be a post-credit sequence, all I could think about was the disservice the writers had done to their own character. Why show me the void bleeding into reality if nothing ever comes of it? Why dispose a key character and leave the consequences of my actions out of the final cutscene? To summarise, in terms of gameplay, Death of the Outsider does enough to keep you interested with the same tried and tested formula that made the previous entries an enjoyable romp, but is hugely let down by its story. It's short, but exploration is key to getting your money's worth, with my £12 price tag clocking in at just under 7 hours. There's replayability in the form of an original game plus mode that sees you play through the story with some of Emily's powers from Dishonored 2, and the usual detailed changes that choosing to stab or spare key figures elicits. But for how fun and richly detailed the gameplay and environments are, the entire experience feels, as I said earlier, pretty hollow. It is fun. It's dark and it's dingy, and at times it can feel like not quite enough effort was put into making full use of the new powers. Death of the Outsider is unfortunate in that it feels like a necessary expansion that will lead on to a new main entry, but after my time with it and replaying the other games, I can only hope that this winds up being non-canon. I know it won't, but I can dream, and the Void is most assuredly for dreamers.